7 days ago, I tried to buy a pile of PC parts, with a budget limit of just $1 for each part. To do that, I was digging through eBay, AliExpress, Facebook Marketplace. I ended up taking risks on extremely old hardware, some of which probably shouldn't even be powered on anymore. But somehow, I finally managed to gather all the parts I needed. So now, let's see what's actually inside these boxes, how I managed to buy them, and whether any of this can really be turned into a working PC.
Before we start, just remember, this video is purely for entertainment. I do not recommend trying to build a gaming or work PC with literally $1. Please save your money and buy something stable instead, unless you also enjoy emotional suffering.
And there's one important rule I need to make clear from the beginning, so nobody gets angry later. I only count the original negotiated item price. No coupon codes, no promo discounts, and shipping costs do not count. Alright, and let's begin with the first component. Now, for a $1 PC build, the hardest part to find is definitely the motherboard. I spent almost 3 straight hours scrolling through eBay searching only one word: motherboard. And look at this disaster, $25, $30. Even ancient destroyed boards were getting bid up past $10. At this rate, my $1 PC was going bankrupt before it even existed. Every listing instantly got pushed to ridiculous prices. My budget couldn't even afford some people's I/O shields, so I set the maximum price filter to $1 and searched specifically for a motherboard. And wow, things somehow became even more hopeless. 2 hours passed, then 4. I went through hundreds of listings, random liquidation sites, sketchy marketplace posts. I was genuinely starting to lose my mind. At one point, I seriously thought this entire challenge was impossible. And then, wait, stop. Do you guys see what I'm seeing right now? Gigabyte H61 motherboard untested. The seller misspelled the title so badly it basically became invisible to eBay itself. The algorithm buried it into another dimension. Nobody found it. Nobody bid on it. And somehow, in the middle of absolute desperation, I got saved by somebody's catastrophic spelling skills. 1 week later, this cursed motherboard finally arrived at my laboratory. Now let's see if I can bring it back to life. Oh, it's actually a real Samsung H61 motherboard. It looks almost exactly like the photos from the listing. But the terrible part is, the seller didn't protect the CPU socket at all during shipping, and somehow a few of the socket pins ended up bent, which is basically the kind of thing that instantly ruins your mood. Other than that though, I honestly don't see any obvious signs of serious damage. So now comes the terrifying part. I grab a pair of tweezers and start carefully bending each pin back into place one by one, hoping I don't accidentally destroy the motherboard completely in the process. And after finally finishing, all I can do now is pray this thing still works. Now that the skeleton was finished, it was time to find the brain. And finding a $1 CPU for this Gigabyte H61 motherboard on eBay was basically impossible. Not because they didn't exist, I actually found a few listings, like an Intel Core i3-2100 for just $1. Sounds amazing, until you notice the $7 shipping fee. Classic seller trap. At that point, I realized if I kept searching like this, I'd get financially assassinated by shipping costs alone. So, out of desperation, I opened AliExpress. And this is where things get funny. I had never bought anything from AliExpress before, ever. I hate waiting weeks for overseas shipping, so I always avoided it completely. But somehow, my total inexperience accidentally turned me into the perfect new customer for their algorithm. And apparently, the reward for being clueless was an 88% discount, which meant I could buy a legendary Intel Core i5-2500 for only $1.5. At this point, I genuinely didn't know if a real CPU was going to arrive, or just a picture of one. So let's open the package and find out. Oh my god! It's actually a real Intel Core i5-2500, and somehow it looks shockingly clean. The contacts are still in great condition, the heat spreader barely has any scratches, and thankfully there are no signs of bending or physical damage at all. After getting trapped by a bunch of fake cheap listings, I changed my strategy and started sorting everything by the lowest total price, including shipping. And finally, I found something that didn't look like a scam. Check this out. 2 matching DDR3 RAM sticks, 2 gigabytes each, for only $3.50 total. That's about $1.75 per stick. At this point, I felt like some Wall Street investor making the greatest financial decision of my life. And the best part, the shipping was actually reasonable, just $4 through USPS. No stupid $1 item with $28 shipping nonsense. No scam this time. I probably shouldn't hesitate before somebody else steals this deal from me. A few days later, the package was sitting right in front of me, and somehow both RAM sticks worked perfectly. But that doesn't mean I'm going to use all of them. I'm only using one of the sticks. Yeah, I know. Dual channel is better, but I can't break the rules I made myself. This is supposed to be a challenge, not an excuse to build a powerful PC. Using a single 2GB RAM stick means the total memory cost for this entire build is officially under $2, which sounds amazing, until you realize we're about to run Windows 10 on only 2GB of RAM, like it's some kind of crime against humanity, but thankfully, I already have a plan for that problem. Anyway, now we still need the most important thing of all, power. Let's go find the worst power supply possible, but finding a power supply for under $2 on eBay or AliExpress? Yeah, completely impossible. And honestly, I get it. Even the sellers probably don't want people risking their lives with a $1 power supply. At that point, online shopping had completely failed me. So it was time to enter the chaos of Facebook Marketplace. I started searching through old, free electronics listings and eventually found a guy giving away random office PC parts. I sent him a polite message explaining this ridiculous challenge and hoped maybe he'd help me out a little. And boom! Instant rejection. But I kept scrolling. And finally, another listing appeared showing a pile of old dusty power supplies. Completely untested. Sold as is. Exactly the kind of sketchy thing I was looking for. So I took the risk and messaged the seller about the challenge, and somehow this absolute legend agreed to sell me one for only $1.50, mostly because he wanted it gone from his garage. I think he also felt a little sorry for me. The scary part was, I had absolutely no idea which of the 4 power supplies he was going to send me, or whether it would still be alive when it arrived. Perfect. The power supply turned on instantly without hesitation. Next up, the most important part of any gaming PC, the graphics card. And this is where online shopping officially failed me completely. Even the weakest ancient GPS online still cost around $10, and the shipping alone instantly destroyed my budget. So if I wanted a dirt cheap graphics card, I had to hunt for one locally. I skipped all the big stores and drove straight to a small computer repair shop I usually go to. The place looked promising immediately. There were piles of old low-profile GPUs sitting everywhere like forgotten fossils from another era. After digging around for a while, I found one that looked old enough and weak enough that nobody would realistically want it anymore. So I explained the challenge to the repair guy, and somehow, he agreed to let it go for just $1. Alright, I brought it home. There's no sticker, no branding, nothing. The card looks weirdly anonymous, like it's trying to hide its identity. Visually, it doesn't seem damaged, though, except the PCI bracket is bent a little. So far, not terrible. Alright, I'll test it later. Now it's time for storage. And surprisingly, I got this one pretty easily. So let's unbox it and figure out why it only cost $1. And yeah, the second I picked it up, it all made sense. This thing is huge, because it's an old 160GB HDD. And not only is it a hard drive, it's only 160 gigabytes, which honestly feels ancient at this point. Let's be real. In today's world, a 160 gigabyte HDD is basically just a very heavy paperweight. Modern games alone would bully this thing into retirement. Most people probably throw drives like this straight into the recycling bin. But for some random seller trying to clean junk out of a drawer on eBay, $1 is still better than nothing. The only problem is, I already know this thing is going to feel painfully slow. Next up, the CPU cooler. And my original plan was to buy one of those old stock Intel stock coolers online. These things are basically worthless. Nobody even wants them anymore, but then reality hit me. The cooler itself might cost $1 minimum, but the problem is the size. Unlike CPUs or RAM, you can't just throw a chunky metal cooler into a thin envelope and call it a day. Sellers have to use an actual box or thick bubble wrap, which immediately makes the shipping cost explode. At that point, the shipping alone costs more than the cooler itself, which completely ruins the challenge. But luckily, I already had a solution. Remember that repair shop where I bought the GPU? Yeah, this cooler came from the same place. And if you noticed earlier when I paid the guy $2, the extra $1 was actually for this cooler. So now, sitting on the table in front of me are all 7 components needed to build a complete PC. Well, almost. Because I'm still missing a case. And for $1, buying a real PC case is basically impossible. Last time I used a cardboard box for my $1 PC build. But this time, I'm going with something even more cursed. A motherboard box is the case. Now it's finally time for the scariest part, testing all the components together. And no way. It goes straight into the BIOS immediately. No errors, no weird noises, nothing. At this point, I genuinely couldn't believe the cursed $1 PC was actually alive. Alright, time to shove everything into the motherboard box. First, I reinforce the box with tape so it doesn't immediately collapse under emotional pressure. Then I cut out part of the side panel to make room for the rear I/O shield. After that, I mount the motherboard using little standoffs, then secure the power supply with double-sided tape because honestly, we're way past caring about professionalism here. I also run an extension power cable to the back next to the I/O shield, so plugging everything in won't look completely ridiculous. Next comes the GPU. I swap to a low-profile bracket so the box can actually close properly, then cut another opening for the display outputs. But then I realized something terrifying. This thing has basically zero airflow. So now I'm forced to cut a giant hole near the PSU fan. After wiring up the power button, that's it. The $1 PC is officially complete. Alright, let's test some basic performance first. Starting with YouTube playback, 720p runs surprisingly smooth with almost no stuttering at all. Even 1080p works fine, and the system only uses around 1 GB of RAM. But the second I switch to 4K, yeah, the whole machine starts choking immediately. The CPU gets pinned at 100% usage trying to survive. Now it's finally time for the game that appears in basically every video on this channel, Minecraft. At default settings, the game runs at around 30 FPS, sometimes dropping all the way down to 11. So I lower everything to the absolute minimum, and suddenly the FPS jumps up to around 80 to 90, which honestly isn't bad at all. The problem is, the system is already using around 1.3 gigabytes of RAM, meaning there's basically no memory left for anything else. Now let's move on to Tomb Raider. At full HD resolution, this thing only manages around 15 FPS. And yeah, it feels rough. The stuttering is genuinely painful to look at, so I immediately drop the resolution down to HD. But honestly, it barely helps. The FPS only improves by around 10 more frames, and the overall experience still feels pretty bad. At this point, I think the combination of only 2 gigabytes of RAM and this ancient GPU is holding the entire PC back hard. But somehow, the fact this cursed $1 machine can still run games at all is already impressive enough for me. Thanks for watching the video, and hopefully this chaotic experiment entertained you a little.